this is Issa Nakazawa, your host for Transmission Studio, a show featuring the independent artists and community-based organizations that make San Francisco's arts and culture scene what it is today. And today we are so excited to bring you a 1-hour special highlighting CAMFest, which goes down right here in San Francisco, May 9th through 19th. CAM stands for Center for Asian American Media. And our first conversation is with Erica Tanamachi and Diane Quon, the director, producer, and executive producer of Home Court, which has its Bay Area premiere at CAMFest on Mother's Day. Definitely check it out. Followed by a conversation with Thúy, who's the festival and exhibitions director of CAMFest. So definitely stay tuned and enjoy our 1-hour special. Erica and Diane, it's such a joy to have you on Transmission Studio. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
Yeah. So I just want to start and ask, what was that initial spark that got you both into filmmaking?
Do you want to go first?
Well, I always loved film, even growing up. But I was born in Chicago and to Chinese immigrants, and film was not like in the zeitgeist. It was, more traditional things. So, But my dream was to get in film. So when I went to California for grad school, I was able to get a job at NBC in marketing. And that's what most of my background was, in marketing. But one day I always thought I want to make my own film. So eventually that's what happened. About 10 years ago, I started producing my own films.
Was there a first film or a first moment or encounter with film that made you, I don't know, just have that initial curiosity and draw?
No, I think one film that always just stuck with me, and this shows how old I am, was The Sound of Music.
Yes.
Going with my mom and dad and just loving that and just trying to imagine myself being there. So my first dream was fiction, but for different reasons, docs ended up being the space I went into. I'm still pursuing fiction, but docs
are primary.
Yeah.
Thank you. And Erica, what about you?
I probably, as a kid, I grew up playing with cameras and making a bunch of videos. That was always my go-to, school project. And then I come from a family of artists. So it was definitely something that I was in the world. But I then went to college, was studying creative writing. And then it was in the middle of, I was studying abroad in Chile. And I think I was a writer and I liked to shoot stills. And then it was wait, I want to put this together and do moving image and be a filmmaker. Yeah. So then, but at that point I was kind of the end of my undergraduate career. I was at UC Davis of all places. It's not a film school. And then I went, and then after that I went basically right to Hollywood to intern and then kind of found my path into documentary. So
amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was thinking about how finding our voice is this language that's misleading because you're saying, it's hard to even tell the story because it's not linear and it has many branches. But I am curious I'm always curious for me how people get into their specific role, because I think it's hard enough to find the arena that you're passionate about and then honing the specific role and position, which not to say that you have a singular one. Hopefully if you have a career that's long and heterogeneous, you get to do a lot of things. But yeah, how did you kind of hone your voice within film?
Well, for me in particular, I think when I did go after I was down in Hollywood, I was definitely dismayed by Warner Brothers and that whole scene. And this is 22 years ago. So it was definitely not as advanced even as it is now. I felt as a female, I felt like there was nowhere to go. I felt like I was a PA, I was getting coffee and that's it. And I know that there were other houses, but every opportunity that came to me was go be an assistant on a desk and go, there weren't pathways to directing, for instance. Yeah. And I didn't necessarily know where. So then I ended up in documentary and it felt so much more real. But I would say as far as finding my voice, it's taken, I feel like I picked up a camera to make a feature when I was 22 and it ended up not, I followed him for a couple, many months. And then he in the end didn't really want to move forward with it. And I wasn't going to push it, even though I knew I had the rights to flip it. I didn't want to. And then, and then I went to grad school. I basically cut that up and submitted to grad school because I moved up here back to the Bay Area, went to San Francisco State. And that's where I feel what was beautiful is you can find in an environment like an MFA program where you really do get to sort of take the time. That's the opportunity to like find your voice and what you want to say. And I think now when I reflect back, like as I was reading your questions, and it's nice to kind of reflect back, like I'm still telling stories. Like my thesis film was about a personal film about me and my mom. I think, this film that, Home Court is like, yes, it's a basketball story. Yes, it's a JA League story, but it's also a mother-daughter story. Yeah. And I feel like those are the things that it's like, oh, maybe not every director, if someone else was directing this film, they would have seen a different avenue. Absolutely. But for me, that was really my interest, was how all this that was happening, how it was affecting, the mother and the daughter in the family. So I guess
I love that, because I think that our personal experience is always being mirrored, even if it's not in the subject matter, it's in the process itself. So I think that's a great example of how things are more really very circular in our careers and in our projects.
Absolutely.
And roles.
Absolutely.
What about you, Diane? How does this honing look for you?
Well, when I started, like I said, I was in marketing. I was in the business end because I didn't know, like, how do you make a film? Like, how do you even get into it? So it was a great way to get my foot in the door. And I loved marketing. But like I said, I wanted to produce one day, or at least make my own films. I didn't know what producer meant per se, but make my own films. And then it's a long story, but about 10 years ago, one of my friends brought me to Sundance for the first time, my first film festival. And my first film was 20 Feet from Stardom, a documentary. And
so good.
Yeah. And I remember thinking, oh my God, I never thought of documentaries as necessarily being entertaining. I always share this. It's like the thing you see at school about venereal disease, something really dry or something. So I saw 20 Feet from Stardom and remember thinking, a doc can be entertaining, but also you leave differently. You learn about a different world, a different, hear about a story that you may not have known anything about. Yeah. So I went back and I Googled documentaries, and that's when I found Quon in Chicago. I'm from Chicago, and started working there. And before that, I made a short just to get a feel for what position I would want, or what I didn't know the different positions or the different roles. And I directed and produced the short. And I hated directing. I go, okay, I think I'm best as a producer. I love all I feel like my strengths for marketing really do serve in the producing role. And in this way, I feel like I've also been able to really work with a lot of different filmmakers and tell stories that, to me, like I said, entertaining, but hopefully make a difference. And Home Court, I loved because I have 2 daughters who are athletes. And my son was an athlete. My other daughter was an athlete as well. So all 4. Wow. So to be able to support a story and really work with Erica and Jen and Brandon on this meant a lot to me.
Yeah, I love the personal connection. And I love just hearing these stories and connecting them to other folks who don't know where to start. Because I wasn't a filmmaker myself, and I found filmmaking I went to Wesleyan University, which is a big film school or has a film program. And I found it so intimidating. I was like, how does someone get the kind of courage or get the bravery and just the resources to start? So I like hearing stories of how you just start with something that you're curious about, and you can trial and error. You don't need to know exactly what the position is, but I think just starting with whether it's school or a project and putting yourself in that position, you're like, okay, I can clarify from here. Mm-hmm. And I want it now just quickly so that people have context. Home Court is the film that you're both here in town for and it's premiering at CamFest, or the Bay Area premieres at CamFest, which we're going to talk about. But can you just, for the listeners, what is Home Court? What's it about?
Yeah, so Home Court, it's a coming-of-age story. It's about Ashley Chia, who's a second-generation Cambodian American, and we follow her throughout high school. And through following her, we also meet her coach, Jamie Kumara Chan, who kind of helps guide her and support her as her family owns a donut shop, and they're super busy. So we're sort of navigating that whole dynamic on top of sharing the history of the Japanese American leagues, which is actually where she began playing and where she met Jamie too. And and we get to tell that story, which is rich in history, and which actually my father-in-law played in the Nisei Athletic Union, which was the first JA leagues after incarceration down in LA. So
wow, I don't even know. I'm a descendant of Japanese American. So I didn't know about the history.
It's fascinating.
Whoa.
Yeah. So we actually began. So Jen Lee Smith, my producer, we had been chatting about working on a project together, and then her daughter just joined the Ninjas, which is a local team up here. And then she turned to me and she's like, well, do you know much about these JA leagues? They're so interesting. Like, is there a film about this? And I was like, and I'm like, well, I do. My husband and his entire family grew up playing in the leagues, but I didn't, and we were basically riffing kind of like off of what Diane just said about like interest in making documentary films, but with a commercial point of view, like, something that is going to be like, it's broccoli, but it's good broccoli. It's salted, like salted in olive oil.
So, like Brussels sprouts, honey roasting.
So we definitely aligned on that. And then through my cousin who played with in-law, she connected us to Jamie, who connects us to Ashley. So it was all kind of familial, came from the family.
And then how did you get involved, Diane?
I knew Jen Lee Smith, the producer. She had been a supporter of my other films, a couple of other films, and she asked if I would work with them. And I started as a consultant and then as a EP. But like I said, my children all played sports, like high-level sports, and I always wanted to tell a story that Asians can play too. And, Ashley talks about that, about how she's had to break barriers or perceptions. And I love that we're able to address that at the film too.
Yeah, I was curious if that was like a point of connection for both of you in your own professional journeys and personal journeys of like, was there an echo in Ashley's story in your own life?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it did, in the process of filming, it did bring up a lot of emotion for me. Honestly, the whole team, I think, like down from my DP, like I can't tell you how many times we'd all be in tears and like hugging and having just emotional moments. Because I did do a lot of kind of self, like, this is really touching me deeply in a way. And it's not my story, of course. And I'm not Asian American and I don't, have that barrier. But then what I started realizing is this is like a real American story, because what we're also showing is, and what I think I was so touched by, especially in kind of, the dynamic with like Ashley and Mother and like this kind of this separation in a way, it felt like I was witnessing kind of the rupture of what happens to a community and a culture when they come to America. There's so much opportunity here, and it's like there's a lot of great things. There's also a lot of really hard things, and a lot of I think it was going deep into that. I'm very interested in like intergenerational trauma and studying that, and the film sort of explores that also. And I think, and for myself personally, my Jewish ancestors like had that same experience of not being, going into Chicago and then getting beaten up. And so then my grandmother basically erased our Judaism, like erased it from the history. So I grew up not even knowing I was Jewish.
Totally.
And because that was during that time, it was like, it's because it just was missed. It was like, my grandfather was a part of a club that was literally didn't allow like Jewish people in the club because he didn't know he was Jewish. Because his mother was like, no, you're not. He would get beat up and then, And
those gaps and erasures are the consequence of the interruption.
Yeah, exactly. Because you're just like, we're going to assimilate. We're going to be like this, and we can, we can fake it till, and I understand it, but it definitely is a wounding that kind of circles down in generations and cycles down. So I would say that for me was like something that unexpected personal connection that I had.
That. Thank you for sharing. Yeah. Did you have any of that experience of like any resonance with Ashley's journey?
Well, my parents owned a restaurant. So much like Ashley, where her parents were there 24/7 at the donut shop, my parents were always at the restaurant as well. But I grew up playing sports. So like Ashley, I played volleyball in college. I probably was one of the first, with Title IX.
What?
I know.
Let's not downplay that.
That's great. But I love the idea of Ashley and the story, like breaking stereotypes. And always, I feel like through my life, that's happened often when I was working at Paramount. Often people would say to me, they would want to run the numbers by me, like that I was, people just think that you're smarter in one thing. And I think that this story spoke to me in that Ashley's breaking, what people expect an athlete should look like. And I feel like my daughters do the same. And I'm really proud of that. And I love how, and Ashley's brave to share a story too. Yeah. And I really appreciate that.
Did you ever, this is a question for your follow-up, is like, I feel like sometimes, just speaking from my own personal experience, there's that double burden of like pride and also overwhelm sometimes when you have to represent so much for people. And I think it's particularly tough when you're young because you're just like a developmental mess like everyone else. And it's really hard when there's like, I feel like young people are so aware of what the world wants from them because that's how they're trying to tune into how to find belonging. So they're like extra tuned into like what adults expect from them and their peers. And I could kind of see from the snippets, Ashley's very tuned in and dialed into like, I have to carry this whole team and being down for that, right?
Yeah.
But also I wonder the cost of that's unconscious that we're not aware of as young people of like having to be really strong women, having to like be champions, having to be there for our parents and our teammates and kind of like the mask that we end up wearing. Did you have to do any of that in your own career of like, I'm always breaking barriers as the first Asian woman? Like, is that something that you can feel fatigued by, or is that something that you're like, it's part of the thing?
I think there's definitely times when I feel fatigued. There were times where I would say, so after NBC, I was at Paramount and I had worked there a while and I wanted to be promoted, but it was like, oh, we aren't promoting people at this point. And then I saw a man who started after me get promoted. And so I had to fight for it. And then they did promote me. But I was like, why do I have to be the one that fights? Why do I have to prove extra hard that I deserve this when I don't want to say anything bad about the guy, but it's just, it does get tiring. Yeah. But I feel like, to me, it's so worth it. I have 3 daughters, and I would love it to be easier for them. It's always, and I do. This is why I often speak on behalf of producers too, and recognition on behalf of future producers, is to to realize the work that they do in supporting film and. But it's always breaking barriers and tiring, but worth it.
Worth it.
Yeah.
I love that. I always felt like growing up, I was like, I think what we're almost like a lot of the advocacy and the work that we're doing is so that we can get treated with like a sense of banality. Like, I was like, I think what we're like shooting for is that we can be ordinary, which is like a weird goal. But I think sometimes the like constant pressure of being extraordinary and excellent is like people think is like a privilege. And I think for Asian Americans, that stereotype is like really exhausting.
Yeah.
Like, and today I'm excellent. I'm like, I had fantasies of being like mediocre. It's like, wow, what's that like? You get to be like, just, you're just okay, right? Because that over optimizing in us starts so young of like trying to like compete our way to lovability.
Yeah.
And I want to circle back to something you said that I think a lot about in documentary film is like, how do we qualify personally impact? And you tell really impactful stories. So like, what is your, Erica, personal like qualifier of when the story or the process is feeling impactful?
Like when I'm actually like why I take on a project?
Yeah. Because the reason I was thinking about is from what you just said, I was moved by thinking about the impact of the participants, including your team.
Yes.
And I think we don't often talk about that as impact.
Oh, 100%. I started this film with Jen where we both were like, filmmaking is hard. Like making documentaries is like, feels like the hardest. Yes. I mean, everyone's going to say, but independent films, right? Yeah. And if we can't have fun while doing this, why show up?
Not sustainable.
No, it's not. And we had both been in projects that got really hard, and everyone has had those experiences. But after, I think also that I'm, older, I think in the sense of like, I had 20 years of producing and really working in the Bay Area as just kind of like freelance and, in-house and whatever. And they were great jobs. But I think once I was able to take the role of director in this particular film, this was my first directing feature. I was like, that's we're gonna take mental health days when we need them. Anyone who needs, so I would say for sure, like impact starts from like within the nest of the community and each other. And then I guess I will say like, I mean, it sounds so cliche, like, but like, I feel like every director probably says this of like wanting someone to be transformed. And someone said it to me, like after seeing just our rough cut screening, like I felt transformed. Like I felt like I learned something that I had never known in this community that I didn't understand. And like all these that I was like, whoa, you're like, you're like,
can you say that again? You're all,
So, but deeply, I would say I think I study, I mean, I feel like documentaries, they're kind of like a human experience of study. Like I'm so interested in humans and certain people that are so uniquely themselves. And that little micro story resonates and tells such a giant story. Yeah. And I feel like Home Court kind of has that. It's like a micro story, you know, it's a small story about a random high school team, basketball team, you know, down in LA in like communities that aren't very well known or recognized. And yet it's saying this very giant, you know, umbrella of a story.
I love that. I think that's what like good film does is like from the particular springs this like universal, I don't know, like complex truth that is enduring.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
That's beautiful.
Yeah.
What about you, Diane?
Yeah, my first stop was Minding the Gap, and it was about 3 young men who skateboard and realize that their friends and their community, they're really drawn to each other because they're all experiencing, sadly, abuse at home. And I was drawn to it because a couple of reasons. I really appreciated being Liu, the director, and his vulnerability and his willingness to talk about his experience because he's in the film. And at the same time, I just a few years before that, I had lost my son. So I was going through a lot too. And so when you talk about the team taking care of each other, we had made a pact to each other at the very beginning. It's like, when I need to cry, I'm just going to cry. And if you need to cry, you need to cry. You know, just to give each other space and help each other. So as a team, it really meant a lot to me to watch him grow and just work this out together. And then in the film itself, about young men and like how often do you hear young men to speak about their feelings? I'll never forget our first screening and all these young men are standing up and older men saying, I see my story in this story. And and they would share like, stories about their family. And it was amazing to me to hear young men being willing to be vulnerable. And that's when I thought, okay, even if this is all it is, to me, this is worth it, making documentaries, which are so hard. Like you said.
Yes. Well, and I just want to say, when I saw Minding the Gap when it first came out, and I was like, and to me, it quickly became my favorite documentary of all time. I mean, I was like, I would always quote. In fact, when we started our pitch, we were like, even with Home Court, we would reference Minding the Gap as just artistically and everything. And so then when Jen brought Diane in,
you were all
full circle. I was like, whoa, like a little starstruck from this amazingly talented human next to me. So yeah,
but I feel like every film, every doc that I've been able to work on, including Home Court, it speaks to different folks in different ways. Yeah. And even if it touches one person. So even if it's not transforming, but it speaks to them in a way that that's what I think film has that power to do, to start a conversation and to talk about things you may not have ever talked about before.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that, both of you, because I really think that's one of the shifts I've seen in the arts landscape that's really powerful is like, how do we define impact? And we're having a lot more conversations around like, well, the transformation of the crew and the subjects is really paramount. Like it's both, right? It's like hopefully like this, where the film is then going out into the world and radiating out and creating that change, but it's also transforming the director and the producer. And it's those parts are a little bit more hidden because they're not the parts of the marketing and distribution. But if the folks who are in the filming process aren't being treated well or aren't the mental health's not being considered or the pacing, then it's like, what is it for?
Right.
Then it starts to feel like the old school model of like, we're just doing it for the distribution and the show part.
Exactly.
So I like people hearing these stories of like, I chose this intentionally. Exactly. We have all these processes that maybe the audience will never know, but they feel it
exactly
in the
final
film, in the final film.
And even taking it forward to distribution, where we now will be on Independent Lens and ITVS. We got the open call grant, and that last year when we got it, I remember, and we went to like the summit, and it was so. All their values were like exactly in that same landscape where it was like, it felt so good to be like, oh my gosh, it's like there are a lot of people here trying to do this work and really hold that space.
Totally. So. This is like the most I've ever heard people be like, the budgets for our films are moral documents. And like, we have to put into the budgets, like, our commitment to the crew and like paying therapist. Like you're literally planning it way ahead of time. Yeah. And it shows. It's not this like abstract commitment. It's like, this is the line item for making sure our folks are taken care of. So what part of this interview is also so that folks in the city and the Bay Area can attend. So can you like plug your screening? Like when can we go see Home Court?
On Mother's Day.
Oh,
yeah.
That's so perfect.
It kind of
Shed a tear.
I know. So yeah, bring your mother, bring your grandmother. I mean, I think actually
bring the men too.
Bring the men too.
Always bring the men.
Anyone.
Always bring the men.
Everyone.
Absolutely. But it does feel like a kind of an amazing opportunity to start that conversation, especially with intergenerational. So yeah, May 12th at 12:30.
Okay.
Mother's
Where?
Day. At the Great
Star.
Star. Yeah.
Okay.
In Chinatown.
Oh wow.
And yeah.
Perfect
Great
details.
theater.
Perfect storm.
Yeah.
How are you, as we close, like how are you feeling about the premiere? Like do you get nerves? Do you just get excited to like finally connect it to audiences?
I'm on the excited side.
Okay.
I would say, I mean, I think, we're premiering at the VC Film Festival down in LA, and we started with Janum Theater, which was a 200-seat theater, and it sold out within minutes.
Wow.
And I was freaked out because a lot of people I knew still hadn't gotten tickets. And so they were so amazing and accommodating and moved us into the Aratani Theater. So now it's going to be a much bigger audience.
What?
But I'm super stoked and like feel just immense gratitude that it's going to, start going out there. But it's definitely a process. Like
yeah, for sure. Is Ashley here in the Bay now?
She's not in the Bay.
She's in LA. Okay.
She'll fly out tomorrow with interviews and press, and then she'll be there in person. And yeah,
and she's handling it well.
Yeah, I mean, she's great. I think
it's a lot.
Well, and you can kind of she's had a lot of press sort of
training. Okay, got it.
As a basketball player, because that's part of their role.
Very, very true.
Right? Like, so I think she's really great, and she's obviously comfortable with the camera. So
wow,
yeah.
Well, it's been such a pleasure talking to both of you with so much wisdom and insight and experience, and thank you for stopping by BAVC and sharing and transmitting your knowledge.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you so much. You're great questions.
Yeah, and we'll be there. So
Yay.
See you in the audience.
Yay.
And to our listeners, thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of Transmission Studio. And stay tuned for our next episode where we talk a little bit more about CamFest and what to expect. So yeah, definitely catch that. Thank you. Thúy, I'm so excited to have you on Transmission Studio. Thank you so much for being here.
I'm so honored. Thank you.
Yeah, so for the listeners, we met last year, right, at the Center for Asian American Media Festival when I was doing a Q&A. And
yes, you were a fantastic moderator.
Yeah, I just loved your energy, and it feels full circle to be able to have you on this side of the conversation, lacing us with your wisdom. So thank you.
Yes, and I thought you were so amazing with all your questions, and I'm like, I hope I'm on the other side of that. Once.
Oh, you are. You're here. So before we dive into the particulars, can you just give us like high level your role and like maybe one thing that you're passionate about with the work that you do at CAM?
Yeah, so I'm the Festival and Exhibitions Director at CAM, which stands for the Center for Asian American Media, and I oversee CamFest, which is the leading showcase for Asian American film or Asian American talent in film, music, food. We're very multidisciplinary. Yeah, and we're here. We're neighbors.
Yeah, we are.
We're neighbors.
Demystifying.
BAVC.
And I remember last year I was, we were having like our little interlude conversation, and you pulled off like the most programs ever at a CamFest, right? Like you had programmed like 50 things for one festival last year, right?
It was the most programs that I've ever curated in a festival. It was 55. The year prior, we were just coming out of the pandemic. We were hybrid. We only had 20 programs. It was my first year. And so we went from 20 and we scaled up to 55, and I was going crazy. But it was amazing because we had, of course, so many film screenings. We had industry events, and we had a lot of food and music programming. So it was all in person, so it felt like the energy was really vibing.
Yeah, CamFest is amazing, and I'm always just in awe of festival directors and curators because it's so much goes into it, and I think it's very relationship driven, and you have to have a vision. So I'm kind of curious, just taking a step back and tying it to some of your lived experience. I know you were born in Vietnam and raised a lot of different places. I think Massachusetts, you moved around a lot. Like, has that kind of hybrid experience, is that something you pull from in terms of even the way you curate and the way you approach programming?
Yeah, definitely. So I'm gonna take y'all way back. So I was born in Vietnam, and my family and I actually left when I was 8 months, and we were part of a later wave of boat people, after the Vietnam War. So this was in like 89 or so, and we ended up in the Philippines in a refugee camp on Palawan. And then I was 5 years old when we were sponsored to America by my uncle, who was already in America at the time. And so part of that moving around was because of that. And so coming to the U.S. as refugees from this country that was part of this war that the U.S. was so involved in, like seeing, how things are happening, unfolding right now in other regions. So it's just something that, I have always carried with me, just growing up in America, never really feeling like I belong in any one place. And then we were always moving around, different places within Massachusetts. Yeah. I grew up on Cape Cod, predominantly. And you know how homogenous Cape Cod is? Yeah. We're the only Vietnamese family there, the only Asian family, on the block. I was one of maybe 3 Asian kids in school growing up, all through middle school, high school. So I always kind of felt like an outsider, never really felt like I belonged. Of course, had these challenges around assimilating at school and then at home, trying to be my parents wanting to be more Vietnamese, and so
being caught in the middle,
being caught in all these different cultures, and I know so many other people share that experience too, whether you're Asian or Black or whoever, whatever your ethnic identity may be, but a lot of immigrants have a very similar thing. And so now being the festival director of CamFest, I'm seeing so many stories, through our submissions, through our films, where a lot of, people's stories are just so relatable to me. And I just, the things that they're talking about, I totally feel it. I'm I was there with you, 5 years old, coming to America, And so I think I carry a lot of that history with me throughout all of my life. I carry that feeling of, just always wanting to belong somewhere or wanting to create spaces of belonging for myself and others. And I really try to bring that into the festival space too, and really trying to build these moments of connections for community.
Thank you so much for answering. Yeah, that's why I was asking it, because I feel like there's so many ways we think of roles as just these competencies, these core competencies. And I find that the breadth of experience that we bring, and it's what creates our lens. This is your lived experience, and there's ways that you're going to curate through it. So I just wanted to kind of context set from how you bring your positionality to your role. And I'm kind of curious, how in your artist statement, one thing that you said that really resonated was this kind of commitment to elevating nuance in BIPOC and AAPI narratives. And that really spoke to me, because I feel like growing up, I'm biracial, Uruguayan and Japanese American, and there would be moments where I felt really invisibilized in Asian American cultural spaces because I didn't fit the stereotypes that I saw reflected that were genuinely those people's experiences. So I wasn't knocking it, but I didn't really feel like there was a lot of nuance. I have a very quirky, eccentric Japanese American father who's a leftist and doesn't have a certain kind of immigrant trope, which is very real, but wasn't my experience. And so why is it important to elevate nuance and create space for that continuum of narratives?
Yeah, and thank you so much for sharing that. I feel like you also have a really interesting story too. For me, trying to elevate nuance is part of, just not relying on stereotypes and not thinking that you know everything, and and always questioning and always like being open, staying curious and asking about people's stories, because we all come from such a unique place. And oftentimes, like, I feel like so much of our identities are just flattened, like through media, through representation, and like I was saying earlier, like I feel like like so much of what I went through is relatable to other immigrant experiences, but even within that, like what I went through is still very specific, as with another immigrant or another, and same for like your story. And so, and I really think that there's like power in specificity, because like what we see on the media is like so generic. And I think Hollywood teaches us that universality is like one kind, it's like a very homogenous way of thinking or seeing or relating to people. And so for me, like I try to come from a place of abundance. And, like for me, like if you have like one Vietnamese American story out there, it doesn't mean that you can't have another one, because they're all coming from different perspectives and point of views. And the more specific you can be about that person's story, I find, the more relatable that is. And so that's why, like, for me, I'm like always thinking about that nuance. Like no one is thinking about coming at it from the same place. And it's just so important for us to have like a multitude of stories out there, and to be able to hold a multiplicity of truths too.
I feel like CamFest does that so well, and I just want to give you your flowers, because I feel like the way you curate, there's feels like there's something for everyone. And especially having, I think, a through line in your work is like you're really good at convening meaningful conversation. So after the film, after the food activations, like you're creating space and holding it for us to all meet each other. And if there is like moments of conflict or misunderstanding, like that's great. Like we can have that conversation in person. So why is it, in your own kind of words or experience, like what's important about convening people for meaningful dialogue?
Yeah, so I feel like I'm such a student of Grace Lee Boggs and Adrienne Murray Brown, and thinking about critical connections and emergent strategy, right? Critical connections over critical mass.
Yeah.
And I think about how the large is just a multitude of like, little day-to-day connections. And, and this is how we build movements, right? Not starting up here, but starting down here, like on a more grassroots level, like thinking about who your neighbors are, thinking about your friends, and like just really like moving more deeply in terms of like how you build relationships and how you build connections, and how are you talking to each other? And part of that, the more deeply you know about someone, like the more trust is cultivated, between people. And I think trust is so important to our lives and our day to day, and trust is so integral to building movements. And so without that, that deep like day to day interactions, like we're not going to be able to really move anywhere together, as a larger group. And so at CamFest, that's why I keep thinking about, even if we have an event that is more intimate, like 50 people or so, or even 100, like that's okay. Because those 100 people or 50 people are going to have a chance to really, gel with each other. And then, and they're going to be able to like bring out, those ideas to other folks around them too, and then it just like continues to multiply.
It's like the mycelium, the mushroom network,
the
fungal network of culture.
We love fungus.
Like shout out Adrienne Murray Brown.
Shout out Adrienne.
Biomimicry,
right?
Which I feel like it does make sense to how the systems that you create. And I'm curious if like there's any changes in the actual program design that are in response to COVID and like other compounding circumstances and conditions. Like, do you do more live streaming events now? Or are you thinking of like this hybrid third space? Like, how have you responded to the changing conditions?
I think for us, we were responding to it more during the pandemic, and this is actually before I started working at CAM, but I noticed, a lot of our programs went online. CamFest was online for like 2-ish years or so. And then when I came in 2022, the festival that I worked was our first hybrid experience. And so we were both online and in person. And to be honest, like I do want to think more about accessibility too, and how does that virtual space reach different people? Yeah. But where we're at now, we're thinking a lot about our capacity, our budget, and so it's just not as possible anymore for us to do live streaming because that does cost a lot.
Yeah.
And so we have decided to focus all in the in-person and for right now. But it is something that I'm thinking about for the future and, something that, I would love for us to find more funding around. And even if we can't do virtual accessibility, I'm thinking about the in-person accessibility, whether it's trying to have more captions for our films, trying to sorry, I'm like spit.
I didn't even notice it, so I was like, I love that.
Passion. Trying to have more, captions, for example, or, even audio descriptions. We're not quite there yet, but thinking about ASL interpretation. So it's there, it's on my mind, but we can't have it all at once. So it's just step by step, little by little, we're building that. Yeah.
And foundation. I do feel like CamFest has like almost like a local cult following. Like all the events are always sold out. And I don't know what the secret sauce is to that, but I feel like you have that culture that you've built around CamFest. Would you say that's true?
Well, we're moving into our 42nd year.
Oh, that's why.
Of the festival.
Wow.
I know. And then the organization is 43 years. Wow. And so, so much of this work was done before me, and I feel so privileged to be able to continue. But yeah, I think just year after year, we're always focusing on the work, how to bring community together. And I think people start to really rely on CamFest to be this space where they can be introduced to all of these Asian American media or films that you don't really get to see anywhere else. Even now in our streaming age, there's still a lot of these films that don't make it on the networks quite yet. So
absolutely exclusive.
I know. Hella
come
exclusive.
to CamFest.
Yes.
Catch our exclusive screening. I know I will be. And I'm curious. So one of the goals or intentions behind this show is really giving independent artists and community-based organizations a chance to talk about from their point of view and perspective, which is changing all the time. How do you describe the state of the Bay? Because there's so much language and narrative that is being outsourced and kind of predictable. So from where you stand as someone who's been around for a minute, how would you kind of characterize the moment we're in terms of arts and culture in the Bay?
Yeah, I think the arts and culture is still rich, but I think we're still trying to recover from the pandemic. Yeah. I think the pandemic was just a huge reset for all of us. And especially in the film festival and media space, we're seeing a lot of changes in terms of how people are watching films and streaming films. We're seeing businesses and venues closing, theaters closing especially. So there's just more limited number of venues available to us. And then also prices are increasing too. And so things are just costing more, and then you have less spaces to consider, and then people aren't going out as much, and so it's just a lot to contend with.
It is.
And I think it's so emblematic of just, we have been doing this for many, many years, but clearly, we're in a new age right now. So how do we take a step back and really re-envision our work and our festival? If folks aren't coming out, why is that? And I think that we really need to really reflect on that a little bit more and kind of re-envision the festival space. If this hasn't been working for the last couple of years, what do we need to do to change, and really be open to that change?
Yeah, I love that. I think that one of the positive consequences of COVID is nonprofits and organizations working collectively and realizing, hey, we need to collaborate on survey findings and taking a pause to audit the landscape and what are the needs that we need to meet. And honestly, I do think we're in a moment where people don't necessarily know yet. I think we're all figuring it out on the side of the consumer and the producer.
Totally.
We're just how do I want to experience things? There's so much change that I think it can be a lot of compounding things at once.
Yeah.
So responding.
Yeah. Also, shout out to BAVC for leading that survey, the field-wide media landscape. Yeah. And what you were saying too, what I'm really grateful is that, I'm able to speak to a lot of Bay Area media leaders from other film festivals. We've been collaborating more, doing receptions at Sundance, and so that has felt really nice, and especially here at 9th Street, we have BAVC, we have Frameline, we have JFI, Jewish Film Institute. And so, And, you know,
Critical
all of our,
mass.
I know, it's a
critical connection.
critical connections leading to critical mass.
There we go. Boom. We're still on.
We're still on.
And from your personal perspective, and it can be like personal and work or one and the same, what keeps you personally committed to the Bay Area and living your life here and doing your work here?
Yeah, I grew up most of my life on the East Coast, Cape Cod. Shout out Cape Cod.
We love your chips, bro.
And then Nantucket tea. And then I went to school in DC, and I was in DC on and off for 7 years, right? And I always wanted to like move to the Bay Area because I'm like, oh, West Coast, there's hella Asians out there.
Hella Asians.
And especially the Bay Area, there's such a rich Asian American history, and you know, it's just been such a focal point of Asian American activism and movement building.
Absolutely.
And I'm like, there's got to be jobs in the Asian American arts field there. You know, there has to be. And I literally like Googled Asian American entertainment,
Asian American art stuff with
right.
jobs.
And then CAM came up, and I was like, what? Like, this is, anyways. So that, you know, I came to the Bay to be a part of this community, and like, honestly, it's been really awesome. I mean, there's been challenges too, right? It's hella expensive to live here. There's all of that. But what's great about the Bay is just like there are so many opportunities. There are so many like arts organizations, arts nonprofits. There's so many artists here who are working and collaborating with each other, and everyone is super friendly and, you know, and just like down to like teach and learn and like exchange ideas. And there's a lot of fellowship opportunities also. And so I feel like there's like, you know, really, you know, you could really like I came in like not knowing anyone or anything, and I you know, found all these opportunities to meet people and to learn more about the community and be more involved. And so I think that's what really keeps me here is like, you know, just these communities that I found and been able to cultivate.
And I feel like in the Bay, community is not as much of a buzzword. Like I think because of the way that it's designed, and it really feels like a tangible thing that we have access to here. Because I feel like people on the internet are like, what do people mean? What do you mean the community? I'm like, come to the Bay, because it's a real thing here.
Yeah.
And I want to sink into a little bit of the CamFest program, because you know, it's coming up May 9th.
Yes.
What can we expect? Like, what are you excited about? Is there a festival theme or is there not?
Right. This is why I'm here to talk about the festival. I was like getting lost in the sauce.
No, this is what we're here to do.
All right. So CamFest 2024. So one of the themes this year is lifting the truths of our stories, and just thinking how our stories are, you know, they're brave, they're bold, they're bizarre, and like there's just so many layers to our stories. But most importantly, the stories belong to us, right? They're from the community. And what does it mean for us to be able to have these generous expressions of who we are and where we want to be, and really lifting that. The other thing that was top of mind for me as I was curating this year is just, you know, obviously it's an election year.
Yes.
And what does that mean? You know, like I know, like, you know, folks are, you know, like, yeah, we're a little anxious. And I really wanted to explore the roles that we play in shaping democracy and civic engagement. And so we do have, you know, several films that reflect that. And so, for example, our opening night film is Admissions Granted by Hao Wu and Miao Wong. And it's about the overturning of affirmative action last year in 22. So it follows like all the players in that. And I think it's a really searing look at the process, how it happened, both sides. And by the end of it, you're like, it makes you like really think more deeply, you know? And now we're like seeing like the consequences of that overturning just happening. And so I think it's just a really important conversation for all of us to have right now, not just Asian Americans. And then our closing night film is And So It Begins by Ramona Diaz. She's a veteran Filipino filmmaker. This follows the Filipino election in 2022, I believe. And it follows former Vice President of the Philippines, Leni Robredo, and Maria Reza, the journalist at Rappler, and the Nobel Peace Prize winning journalist. And, you know, like Maria Reza is really reflecting on, you know, just kind of, you know, the state of journalism right now and just misinformation. And even though this film takes place in the Philippines, there's just so much there that's resonant to what's happening here in America as we're battling our own misinformation, as we're, you know,
absolutely
So we have several films like that. And I'm really excited about our food programming, of course.
Tell us.
We have 2 dinners this year. One, which is a collaboration with Damansara, the Malaysian restaurant in Noe Valley, with Dabao Singapore. They're a Singaporean pop-up. So that's going to be really fantastic. That's on May 14th. And then May 15th, we're going to be at Comage. Chef Hanif Sadir, he's going to be teaching us, and we're going to be learning more about northern Iranian food, which is very rare here. Iranian food itself is already really rare, but northern Iranian food, like I had not had food like this before.
It's more LA.
It's more LA, you think
yeah.
so? Okay, yeah. So so y'all better come.
Right.
Because, do you want to pay $300 to fly to LA, or do you just want to go down the street to the Mission and eat at Comage? So
You do the math.
I know. So it's a multi-course family style meal, and his food is so fresh, so delicious. He sells teas at the restaurant as well, like loose leaf teas and spices, and so it'll be really an incredible experience. And then one more I'll talk about is our Directions in Sound concert, which is free 99, and it's at the Yerba Buena Gardens. It's a collab with the Yerba Buena Gardens Festival, and our headlining artist is Tao, formerly of Tao and the Get Down, Stay Down. She's a local Vietnamese American musician, and then opening for her is Nikpo, another local Filipina musician who has just such a beautiful voice. I'm so excited for the combination of these two.
Wow, I love how Cam's just like immersive. It's like hitting all the different mediums, and there's something for everyone. And I think that's like a really honest reflection of even how these creative communities interact. Like all of the chef homies are friends with the filmmakers, so it feels like an honest reflection of the ecosystem. Yeah. So I'm hella excited. And can you just plug the festival? It's May 9th through the 19th?
It's May 9th through the 19th. You can get tickets on our website at camfest.com.
And what are you looking forward to? Like, what are you most excited about this year? Is there anything you're doing different or more of?
Yeah, so we're building out an industry hub this year at 419 Gallery Space in the Soma. So actually, it's a 10-minute walk from where we are right now. And our events there are going to be free. So we have a filmmaker summit with panels, conversations. Of course, we'll have our industry panels too. We have 2, one with WBD and one with NBCU. And folks can just RSVP online.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much, Thúy, for coming on and shouting out all your amazing work at CamFest. We're definitely going to be there supporting. So thank you so much.
Thank you for having me. Really appreciate it.
Yes. And thank you to all of our listeners for tuning in to this exclusive 1-hour episode on CamFest and the amazing filmmakers that make it possible. We'll see you next time.